is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show. I appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. And last week we did pretty well on our episode. I discussed all the quarterback prospects, at least the top quarterback prospects in this upcoming NFL draft this year of 2024. I discussed a little bit of where the best landing spot for those specific players would be and kind of a general consensus of who's going to be successful and who's not going to be successful. And today we're going to be doing a little bit more of that, but a little bit, less in depth, but more broad because I'm making my final entire first round mock draft predictions. So I'm going to go through 1 through 32. I'm going to go through all the picks and I'm going to obviously make my predictions. And this Thursday, obviously the NFL draft is starting. So we're going to find out how accurate I'm going to be, and we're going to find out which teams are going to reach Cleveland, Chicago, New England. We're going to find out what teams are going to reach. We're going to find out who is honestly going to make a big time difference in the NFL and who's going to change these franchises' trajectories for the next 10 to 12 years and counting. And obviously, everyone, as you all know, I'm a Bucked Up ambassador, so use promo code SHOW32, get yourself 20% off all of your pre-workout or gym gear orders. So without further ado, let's get started on this week's episode. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to do basically my entire first round mock draft. I'm going to go through all the picks. I'm going to tell you who I think that these teams are personally going to pick. Obviously, I could be completely ass backwards on who's going to go somewhere, but judging from how much I watch the NFL, I know a good amount of what team needs are for every franchise in the NFL, pretty much. Call me a nerd, but that's just the way it is. I watch football sometimes too much. A lot of people tell me too much. But like I said, we're going to go through my entire final mock draft before the draft starts this Thursday. And after I make my mock draft, I'm going to do just a little something cool that I decided to throw together. A bunch of college football matchups that we wish we could see. And I think the answers I give you are going to be kind of shocking. So let's get started. So with the first overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, the Chicago Bears are going to select quarterback Caleb Williams. This is a slam dunk home run. There's no really thought for another pick to go first overall. Caleb Williams is clearly the absolute best prospect, at least at the quarterback position we've seen since Andrew Luck and Trevor Lawrence. Like I talked about last week, I believe he is a generational talent type quarterback, and you can throw him in with that group of people where he's going to succeed no matter where he lands in the draft. And personally, while I have my reservations about Chicago as an organization as a whole, Caleb Williams is still by and far the most NFL-ready quarterback in the entire draft, and he's overall just the best overall player in the entire NFL draft. So I think it's a clear number one choice. I think it's the clear first overall pick. So the Chicago Bears are going to go with a guy who had a 9-2 touchdown to turnover ratio in college, or 9-1 touchdown to turnover ratio in college. Quarterback Caleb Williams out of USC, he's going to go first overall. So number 2, the Washington Commanders. And the Washington Commanders, in my opinion, are going to take quarterback Drake May from the University of North Carolina. I have talked so much about this entire draft class of quarterbacks, but I personally think Drake May, out of all the top prospects in the NFL draft this year, I think Drake May has the biggest potential to be a bust. His inconsistency is very questionable to me, and he's very turnover prone. He does not take care of the ball that well, but he's still a big kid, strong arm. His accuracy is, like I said, hit and miss. He has a tendency to throw a lot of picks and not have the best decision making when it comes to what you want at your quarterback. And yeah, he looks like Justin Herbert when he throws the football. Like I said, he's big, strong, can move around. But for me, he reminds me more of a Mitch Trubisky and a Sam Howell, even though I personally believe May is better than both Trubisky and Sam Howell. But nonetheless, I do think he's going to be the quote-unquote bust of the draft. I think that Washington would make a mistake if they took Drake May, but I do think that Drake May goes number 2 to the Washington Commanders. So at number 2, I do believe Washington takes quarterback Drake May from University of North Carolina. The New England Patriots have the 3rd overall pick, and they're going to go with quarterback Jaden Daniels out of LSU, the Heisman Trophy winner. Top 3 pick. Go figure, a Heisman Trophy winner would be a top 3 pick. Like I said before, that in previous episodes, it seems like the Heisman Trophy is the kiss of death when it comes to going to the NFL. And that's really for anybody who's getting drafted in the top 10 picks, at least 99% of the time, I would say. You're going to an organization that is basically a dumpster fire. They don't know what they're doing, personnel-wise, coaching-wise, player-wise, and the culture is a little bit of a mess. But Jaden Daniels, New England has easily probably the worst offense in the league, and I don't think, at least the worst scoring offense in the entire league. I don't think it's necessarily close. When in regards to talent on the roster, when it comes to the Patriots, I don't see much on there, and I don't necessarily believe Jaden Daniels will play right off the rip. I think he'll learn behind Jacoby Brissett, which, you know, he's Jacoby Brissett. He's not a bad quarterback. He's not a world beater. He's not an otherworldly talent like Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, but, you know, he's serviceable for what New England has, which is basically next to nothing. So I do believe they do need to get another quarterback in-house. It's quite obvious, especially since shipping off Mac Jones, and we all knew that he wasn't going to work out too well in New England. Not really entirely Mac Jones' fault, even though he's a little bit of a locker room cancer. But the fact of the matter is New England did a piss-poor job at surrounding him with weapons his entire time in New England, so it's plausible that Jaden Daniels could succeed because I do believe he's more talented than Mac Jones, especially the fact that he can run, he can throw. Mac Jones was basically a statue. He can move around a little bit, but he's nowhere near what Jaden Daniels is as an athlete or as a quarterback, in my opinion. So New England, without a doubt, they'll probably end up in the top 10 again next year in next year's draft in 2025, but you need your quarterback. You need a quarterback. You need a guy in that locker room who can galvanize the troops and just lead that franchise for the next 10 to 12 years or however many years they play. They have to be a leader. They have to be that guy. And Jaden Daniels, I believe he does have that potential. So with the 3rd overall pick, I believe the New England Patriots are going to select Jaden Daniels, quarterback from LSU. Number 4, the good old Arizona Cardinals. I believe they draft wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State. And I don't think it's necessarily close when it comes to route running, hands, speed. While he's not known for his speed, he's mainly known for his, catching ability and route running ability. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is by far the best wide receiving prospect, probably since Calvin Johnson, if we're being honest. He is otherworldly, especially when it comes to playing with C.J. Stroud that year at Ohio State. Hot take right here, if Marvin Harrison doesn't get injured against Georgia 2 years ago, Ohio State was well on their way to beating Georgia, and they would have throttled TCU in the national championship just like Georgia did. So, one injury away can derail your entire franchise, or in this case, your entire college football team. But Marvin Harrison, easily the best wide receiver in the draft and not really close. There's quite a few good wide receivers in this draft. It's a very deep class, but Marvin Harrison just sticks out among the rest. Even though he didn't play in the SEC, whereas if you perform there, you're that guy. At the same time, Marvin Harrison was making these SEC defenses look silly when he did play them in the college football playoff. So at number 4, Arizona Cardinals, they're going with Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State. So we're going to do a little trade action here. So originally with the 5th overall pick, we have the Los Angeles Chargers, but I believe since Minnesota got that other first-round pick, I believe that they're going to give the Chargers the 5th overall. They're going to give the Chargers the 11th overall pick and the 23rd overall pick for the 5th overall pick. So with the 5th overall pick, now being the Minnesota Vikings, they're going to go with quarterback J.J. McCarthy out of Michigan. It speaks for itself how good J.J. McCarthy has been over the past couple years. He's only lost one college football game his entire career, when in all reality he shouldn't, because it was TCU. But when you look at him, I see a more athletic version of Kirk Cousins. And I do think J.J. McCarthy, while obviously Kirk Cousins has tenure in the NFL, J.J. McCarthy, like I said, I think he's a more accurate, athletic version of Kirk Cousins. And Kirk Cousins has proven that you can win a lot in this league. So, I personally think he's walking into a great situation. I think he's going to be given the keys to a Porsche and just ask not to crash it. So, I think J.J. McCarthy walks into a great situation going to Minnesota. Like I said, I think he's a more athletic and accurate version of Kirk Cousins. So I think J.J. McCarthy from Michigan goes to the Minnesota Vikings from a trade at pick number 5. At number 6 overall, the New York Giants are going to select wide receiver Rome Odunze from Washington. So here's the problem with New York, among just New York in general. New York teams always suck. It seems like they're always trash. Sorry, Giants fans. Sorry, Jets fans, but that's the reality of it. But the New York Giants, they have nothing good going for them. I do believe, I know for a fact that they need a new quarterback. The fact that they still gave Daniel Jones all that money is still baffling to me, but I don't think they'll renew his contract, but you have to roll with him this year. They're going to stink either way, Giants fans. You don't have Saquon anymore, and you need weapons if you're going to salvage anything from Daniel Jones to, possibly get a trade out of him. Maybe someone will give you some draft capital. You're not going to get a first rounder like you spent on him years ago, but when you look at wide receivers in this class, a lot of people would pick Malik Neighbors, and I think Malik Neighbors is an absolute stud. He's an absolute speed demon, but I'm going with another guy who reminds me of Marvin Harrison when it comes to pure route running ability, catchability, and he's still got some speed to him. So personally, I think the Giants go with wide receiver Rome Odunze from Washington at the 6th pick. They got to try and, prop up Daniel Jones' numbers somehow and make him look like a competent quarterback so they could possibly move off him in the future. So at number 6, Rome Odunze from Washington is going to go to the New York Giants. Number 7, the Tennessee Titans are going to select offensive lineman Joe Alt from Notre Dame. This is the worst offensive line in football. They need a quarterback too. I don't necessarily know if Will Levis is the guy, but he has a better chance of succeeding if he's not ending up on his ass every other play. So I think it's important that Tennessee addresses the offensive line right now. I know they need weapons. I know they may need a quarterback. I think there's something there with Will Levis. I really do. But right now, you need to protect him. If Will Levis is to succeed, he can't end up on his ass every other play. So with the 7th overall pick, the Titans are going to select Joe Alt, offensive lineman from Notre Dame. Let's move on to number 8. The Atlanta Falcons are going to select defensive end Dallas Turner from Alabama. Dallas Turner, honestly, is a freak of nature. If you look at the Atlanta Falcons, there's not much they need. They have a solid defense, obviously bringing in Kirk Cousins. We all know how everyone feels about Kirk Cousins. I think he's a competent quarterback, not necessarily for that contract that Atlanta's paying him, but he's competent nonetheless, and he's pretty good nonetheless. So with a decent offensive line, you got good weapons, you got Bijan Robinson, you got Drake London, you got, there's a lot of pieces there. There's not many holes in the Atlanta Falcons team in general, so you can never have too many pass rushers in this league. That's why Pittsburgh is so good. That's why Baltimore is so good. That's why Dallas is so good on the defensive end and the defensive side of the football. So I think at number 8, the Atlanta Falcons draft Dallas Turner, edge rusher from Alabama. Chicago Bears with the 9th overall pick are going to go with defensive end Jared Verse from Florida State. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Chicago has okay weapons right now. I don't necessarily think they need to draft a wide receiver at this spot. I flip-flop back and forth between them picking a wide receiver or them picking a defensive player. Chicago's a defensive culture. We already know this. We've known this for years by now. I mean, 40 years speaks for itself since their last Super Bowl win and only Super Bowl win. But if there's one thing Chicago does know how to do, it's draft defensive talent and develop that. It's like I said, they're allergic to offense, but they literally are so good at drafting defense. So I think Chicago goes with probably the second best. You can make the argument as first best, but second best defensive end in the entire NFL draft, Jared Verse from Florida State. I think he goes to Chicago, and I think he makes a big-time difference. Probably even makes the Pro Bowl his first year in the league. So at number 10, the New York Jets are going to select wide receiver Malik Nabers from LSU. Like I mentioned earlier, Malik Nabers, he's a speed demon. When he gets in the open field, he just turns the burners on. And he made SEC defenses look like fools. Now, I know LSU wasn't exactly what they were with Joe Burrow at quarterback, but they were still solid with Jaden Daniels at quarterback. And Malik Nabers really stood out against teams like Georgia, Alabama, Auburn. Malik Nabers is a really fast and really good wide receiver. Probably, you can make the argument, probably the second best wide receiver in this draft. I think, personally, Rome Odunze is better, and obviously Marvin Harrison's better. But for the Jets, I get the argument of you would go with an offensive lineman because you need to protect Aaron Rodgers. We can't have another situation if you're a Jets fan. What happened to Aaron Rodgers last year? Injured after the first 4 plays of the season. But at the same time, with injuries on offense piling up for the Jets, they do need more weapons. You can never have too many weapons in this league. So I believe that the New York Jets get a wide receiver to complement Garrett Wilson. Malik Nabers from LSU goes to the New York Jets at number 10. At number 10. So, with a trade, like I said earlier, Minnesota had the 11th and 23rd pick in the NFL draft, but obviously I think they'll trade up to the 5th spot and give both those picks to the Chargers. So the Chargers would now have the 11th pick. And I believe, obviously, you got to keep Justin Herbert healthy. You really have to keep him, inside the pocket. You got to keep him good at what he's doing and keep him from ending up on the PUP list. So I think the Chargers with the 11th overall pick select offensive lineman Talise Fuaga from Oregon State. Big, strong offensive line presence. That's very important in this league. And you got to keep your quarterback healthy. And what better way to do that with one of these big offensive linemen? This is a decent offensive line draft, I will say. So I think at the 11th overall pick, which now the Chargers have, they select Talise Fuaga from Oregon State. With the number 12 overall pick, the Denver Broncos are going to select quarterback Bo Nix from Oregon. I mentioned last week that I thought Bo Nix is one of the most NFL-ready quarterbacks, and I said he was the most NFL-ready quarterback, but I was discounting Caleb Williams. I was taking him out of the equation because he's clearly the most NFL-ready prospect in this entire draft. Like I said, he's basically the unanimous first overall pick for this entire draft. So I was excluding him. But as far as NFL-ready quarterbacks go for the rest, I think Bo Nix is that guy. Most career starts in college football history. So I think he fits what Sean Payton is doing in Denver. Denver, it was a shit show with Russell Wilson, but, was it all on Russ? Was it not all on Russ? Was it all coaching with their previous coaching staff? Who knows? Nobody will ever know the true answer, but I think Sean Payton needs to get his next guy, and I think that next guy is probably the most NFL-ready quarterback in the draft, and that is Bo Nix from Oregon. Number 13 overall pick for the Las Vegas Raiders. I think they're going to take cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama. That is such a badass name. Some of these names are just so damn awesome. And this dude from Bama can hit. He can cover and he can hit. So And the Raiders, they need something else going for them on the defensive side. Obviously, they need a ton of help on the offensive side of the football, but I don't necessarily think they can address all of that in the draft this year. But their defense is putrid. Other than Max Crosby, their defense is absolute putrid on the back end, so they really need someone who can not only cover, but install a presence to the defense. And Kool-Aid McKinstry does that, especially at Alabama. He can hit, and he can cover, and he's pretty fast. So I think the Vegas Raiders at number 13 take Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama. So number 14, the New Orleans Saints are going to select offensive lineman from Penn State, Olu Fashanu. Like I said, you can never have too many great offensive linemen in this league. You need to protect your quarterback, and you need to be able to run the football. And this dude is that guy. He is, big, strong. I don't know too much about much offensive linemen, but I do know for a fact that when I did watch big games like Penn State and Michigan or Penn State and Ohio State, this cat really stood out and really didn't allow much to happen to his quarterback, at least when it pertains to the guy he was trying to pass block or run block. But a big body who can move well. I believe that Olu Fashanu from Penn State goes to the New Orleans Saints at the 14th pick. All right, let's move on to the 15th pick with the Indianapolis Colts. I think the Colts take tight end Brock Bowers out of Georgia at this spot. So Anthony Richardson has had a lot of potential last year until he got injured. He honestly shocked me with his play because I thought he was the most raw quarterback talent from last year's draft. I didn't necessarily think he was going to be successful at all, but he did show something in his short time in Indy before he got injured. So I think you give him, obviously, extra help. They still have Jonathan Taylor. They still have a solid offensive line. They do need to rebuild that a little bit, but I think they address that in the later rounds. But he needs weapons. Colts defense is all right. It's all right. But Anthony Richardson, for him to succeed, especially with a raw quarterback talent and someone who's not necessarily the best pocket passer, you have to surround him with good weapons and quality talent so he can overcome any obstacles thrown his way and actually give himself a fighting chance to succeed in the NFL. And what better person to do that rather than the best tight end prospect probably in 10 years in Georgia's very own Brock Bowers. So Brock Bowers, tight end from Georgia, goes at 15. All right, moving on to 16. The Seattle Seahawks are going to select quarterback Michael Penix Jr. from Washington. It's kind of crazy to me how much Michael Penix kind of fell off from being considered a top 2 quarterback, but it's just the fact of what NFL executives are looking for. And I do think the fact that he has an injury history on his knee is probably the main reason that people are steering away from him. But he's a great kid. He's an unreal arm, unreal accuracy. He's a very good damn quarterback. And I think sitting behind Geno Smith, while Geno Smith is not a world beater, he proved that he can make a comeback and actually make something of his career. So what better way I don't think Michael Penix, other than the preseason, will see the field this year unless something drastic happens to Geno Smith. Knock on wood. But I believe the Seattle Seahawks will take Michael Penix Jr. from Washington at the 16th overall pick, and then Seattle's set up for the next 10 to 12 years for their franchise. I think Michael Penix will be the guy in Seattle, not necessarily this year, but once they move off of Geno Smith, I believe it's Michael Penix's team from there on out. Sorry, guys, my contact's bothering me yet again this year. So at number 17, the Jacksonville Jaguars select Xavier Worthy, wide receiver from Texas. Now, talk about a speed demon. This cat broke the combine 40 time. 4.21, I believe you right? Yeah, 4.21 from Xavier Worthy. He is fast. And I believe Jacksonville takes him at 17. The Calvin Ridley signing last year was it was a bust. Calvin Ridley, I don't know what happened to him. Obviously, he's the guy who got busted for gambling and was suspended from the league for a year when he played for Atlanta. But that's a stupid issue in of itself. But the fact of the matter is, I thought Calvin Ridley was going to elevate Jacksonville even further from what they were, but Jacksonville fell off a cliff. But that also has to do with Trevor Lawrence going on the PUP list. So it's very possible that this could end up being a bust. We saw the Cincinnati Bengals years ago draft the last guy who broke the 40-time record, John Ross from Washington, and they drafted him, I believe, with the 12th overall pick, and we all saw how that turned out. Bust. Probably the worst pick in that entire draft for the position that he was picked at. So I worry about picking wide receivers solely off of their speed, but I've watched Xavier Worthy when he was at Texas, the way he torched Alabama's secondary. Not all receivers can just do that easily. John Ross, when he played at Washington years ago, he was not dusting Alabama when he played them in the college football playoff. He wasn't running by those defenders whatsoever. He was not making their quarterback at the time, Jake Browning, have any room to throw, really. He wasn't giving him an option to throw to him, really. So, but Xavier Worthy, he can fly and he can catch. And he toasted a lot of that Bama secondary that entire day. So I think at 17, Jacksonville takes wide receiver Xavier Worthy. 18, Cincinnati Bengals select offensive lineman J.C. Latham from Bama. And this goes without saying, really, of much in-depth analysis, is the fact that you got to keep Joe Burrow healthy. You got to keep this man from getting hurt. The Cincinnati Bengals made the best decision drafting Joe Burrow, but I still feel bad for Joe because he is literally in hell when it comes to offensive line play and development. Even when the year when they made the Super Bowl, he didn't have a great offensive line, and he's constantly getting hurt. So, yet again, Cincinnati Bengals drafting an offensive lineman, and a good one, I might add, from Bama, because all those Bama offensive linemen are good. But that's what they need to do. Draft offensive linemen. Still, you still got Jamar Chase. You still got still got solid weapons. But you got to protect Joe Burrow. You got to protect your biggest asset. So, at 18, Cincinnati, they're drafting J.C. Latham from Alabama. It's not hard. That's not a hard decision to make. 19, Los Angeles Rams are going to select Terrion Arnold, cornerback from Alabama. So, when it comes to the Los Angeles Rams, nobody expected them to do much last year. Obviously, Aaron Donald retiring is very upsetting, and, that hurts their defense. And their defense really was shot the entire year with injuries and just the fact that the old core was just doing exactly that, getting old. So they need some younger players on that defense more than they already have. Young, talented players, and I think Terrion Arnold is that guy. He was pretty good at Alabama, so I'm going to put the Los Angeles Rams rebuilding that defense because you still got Matt Stafford, you still got Cooper Kupp, you still got an okay offensive line, you got Puka Nacua. The Rams' offense is going to be fine, but in all likelihood, they're going to have to win shootouts this entire year. But adding Terrion Arnold from Bama, I think that helps them out a lot. At the 20th pick, the Pittsburgh Steelers select wide receiver Adonai Mitchell from Texas. I flip-flopped so many times between picks of who I thought Pittsburgh was going to draft. Some of the defensive pieces are getting a lot older, like Cam Hayward, so I was flip-flopping between the two Texas players, Byron Murphy Jr. from Texas, the defensive tackle, or obviously Adonai Mitchell, the wide receiver. But since Russ and Justin Fields are now in town, since they're now on the roster, and Pittsburgh's defense has always been good, no matter what, secondary can use a little bit more help, but, we can still address that in the later rounds. But you can never have too many weapons in this entire league, and in order to have Russell Wilson succeed, you have to have good weapons. So, obviously, if Pittsburgh still had Deontay Johnson, I would say we would go with Byron Murphy, but we don't. And we still have Pat Freiermuth, we have Jalen Warren, we still have Najee Harris, we have George Pickens, we still have Calvin Austin, who is kind of growing into his own, but I think adding another wide receiver like an Adonai Mitchell, who great hands, great route running, I think Adonai Mitchell goes to Pittsburgh at 20. And I think Pittsburgh needs to address that wide receiving position just because it'll help him out in the long run if you want Justin Fields to be successful or if you want Russell Wilson to succeed this year. At number 21, the Miami Dolphins are going to select Byron Murphy Jr. from Texas, defensive tackle. With all the injuries that have been piling up for the Miami Dolphins last year, both their edge rushers got hurt. Jalen Phillips got hurt at the most inopportune time right before the playoffs, I believe, or somewhere mid-season. Either way, a lot of injuries happened on the Miami Dolphins roster last year, so it's important to bolster that defense. Their defense was already pretty good to begin with, so now all those players coming back healthy for the next year, and now you're adding probably, arguably, the best defensive tackle in the league or the second best D tackle in the entire draft. I think the Miami Dolphins add Byron Murphy Jr. from Texas. The Philadelphia Eagles at the 22nd overall pick will select Amarius Mims, offensive lineman from Georgia. With the departure of Jason Kelce, it's never a bad idea to address the offensive line to make sure Jalen Hurts stays healthy, to make sure there's running lanes for Saquon Barkley now, and to make sure A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith have their quarterback healthy to throw to them. So, obviously, with a Hall of Famer retiring, I think this addresses some of the Jason Kelce situation. I do not know where exactly he'll play, whether it be left tackle, right tackle, or if they'll groom him to be a center eventually. But this addresses more offensive line issues that the Eagles have had over the past year, maybe year and a half. So I think at the 22nd pick, the Eagles pick Amarius Mims from Georgia. Now, with the Chargers at the 23 overall pick from Minnesota in this case, I think they give Justin Herbert another weapon. I think they get him wide receiver Keon Coleman from Florida State. Keon Coleman, very solid wide receiver. He's up, like I said, this is a very deep wide receiver draft. And like I said before, you can never have too many weapons in the NFL. So I think Keon Coleman goes to the Los Angeles Chargers at the 23rd overall pick. You can never have too many weapons, especially for a guy like Justin Herbert, who, it's unfortunate the way things have turned out for him so far, but it's the fact of the matter is that organization has always been cheap. But now with Harbaugh at the helm of that coaching staff, I think that the Chargers' best years are ahead of them now. At 24, the Dallas Cowboys are going to select Tyler Guyton, offensive lineman from Oklahoma. They need offensive line help, but hell, they need help everywhere on the offense, really. Offensive line is an issue. Their running back room is absolute putrid, but there's no real... I don't think you should be taking running backs in general in the first round just because they're so replaceable, but every now and then you get a Saquon, a Christian McCaffrey, a Derrick Henry, can't miss guys and can't pass up kind of guys. But in the league this year, in the draft this year, there's no said guys like a Derrick Henry or a Saquon Barkley that can possibly make the impact that those players do. And while the Dallas Cowboys need help on the running back core badly, they also need help in the wide receiving core, but they also need help on the offensive line still to protect Dak Prescott, to prevent him from still getting injured, because he's still an injury-prone quarterback. But, Dallas, they're a shit show, and so I think Dallas goes with Tyler Guyton, offensive lineman from Oklahoma. Green Bay Packers, at the 25th overall pick, select Quinyon Mitchell, cornerback from Toledo. Not much I need to say about the Green Bay Packers. They have Josh Jacobs now and a young wide receiving core who is very solid, and you got Jordan Love, who's really coming into his own as a quarterback. So I think it's not a bad idea to bolster the defense, who's still young and still developing and pretty good. So I think the Green Bay Packers address the secondary a little bit more and take Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo. With the 26th overall pick, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to select linebacker Latu from UCLA. Easily the best linebacker in this entire draft. I know some people would say Chop Robinson from Penn State, but I think the way they play, Latu just plays with a certain physicality to him and provides such a needed presence on the defense again for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think Latu is going to be asked to step up big early on for Tampa Bay, and I think he will do so. The core on the defense is not bad whatsoever, but it's not as good as it was when Brady was there and they won that Super Bowl. But the Tampa Bay offense I'm not worried about, especially I think Baker Mayfield, he's a solid quarterback, and I think he deserved that contract. So I think he earned that contract. I wouldn't say deserved, but he earned it. And I think Tampa's offense is fine, so I think they address the defense and go with linebacker Latu from UCLA. Arizona Cardinals. They drafted Marvin Harrison early on. Well, I believe they're drafting Marvin Harrison early on, so I think they're going to address the secondary, which was putrid. I think they get cornerback Nate Wiggins out of Clemson. Solid cornerback. Don't really have anything bad to say about him. And Arizona just needs help more in the secondary. You can never have too many cornerbacks in this league. It's very hard to find a good cornerback, a good quality corner that can stick with you for years on end. The days of, obviously, Sauce Gardner is that guy right now, but other guys include like Darrelle Revis of the past, the Champ Baileys of the past. It's very hard to find guys like that. And I'm not saying Nate Wiggins is one of them, but he's definitely needed cornerback help for the Arizona Cardinals. At the 28th pick, the Buffalo Bills are going to go with, I believe, wide receiver Xavier Leggett from South Carolina. Buffalo needs help badly, especially since Stephon Diggs is gone. I don't know what Buffalo is going to do. Their running back is basically Josh Allen. Now all the receivers, Gabe Davis is still there, but he's not a number one. He's no Stephon Diggs. So I think Buffalo's really in for a down year. I think they're taking a big step back this year. Their defense is getting old. A lot of defensive pieces are gone, including Jordan Poyer. So I think Buffalo's in for a down year. I don't necessarily think they're going to do well at all. They might even miss out on the playoffs, but because they have Josh Allen, they're going to get a chance either way, and they'll make a run for the playoffs again. But I think their Super Bowl window just shut, but they need help at the wide receiving position desperately, so I think they go with Xavier Leggett from South Carolina. Number 29 overall pick, the Detroit Lions are going to select safety Cameron Kitchens from the University of Miami. Detroit, their offense is spectacular, and the front seven of that defense is spectacular. What was their weakness last year? Secondary. Burnt toast all the way around for that secondary. A lot of times they had to win shootouts because of that. But with Cameron Kitchens on the team, I don't necessarily think he'll make an impact, quite like, let's say, an Ed Reed right off the top. But I do think having hit a guy like Cameron Kitchens, who was the heart and soul of Miami's defense last year, the last 2 years really, and easily the best player on the field when it comes to the University of Miami, and amounted for over 10 interceptions in his last 2 years of college. So I think having a guy like Cameron Kitchens who can really take over a game at the safety position, and someone who can really maneuver the field well and really has great field vision, is exactly what Detroit needs. So I think Detroit bolsters up their secondary with safety Cameron Kitchens from the University of Miami. Baltimore Ravens. At the 30th pick, I think they go defense too, and I think they take defensive tackle Leonard Taylor from Miami. Their secondary isn't bad. Their linebackers are still okay, despite losing Patrick Queen. I think they do need to bolster the defensive line and the front seven in general. I don't think you could go wrong with any of the defensive ends, defensive tackles, or linebackers in this draft at this position for Baltimore. So I think you go with the best available person at this point in the draft, at least best available defensive person. Their offense is fine. They got Lamar Jackson. They're fine. So I think they go with defensive tackle Leonard Taylor, who can really just plug up any running lanes in the A gaps. I think he's going to be a stud for a long time in this league. So at 30, I think Baltimore takes Leonard Taylor from the University of Miami. At 31, I think the San Francisco 49ers go with Jordan Morgan, offensive lineman from Arizona. They do need offensive line help. I've seen some shaky play from their offensive line, especially in the Super Bowl when you go up against a team like the Kansas City Chiefs. You can never have too many offensive linemen. So I think the 49ers, they're fine all the way around. Their defense is still solid. Their offense is still solid. San Francisco is still a great team. No matter who they choose at this point, it doesn't matter. They're still going to be a viable force in the NFC. So I think they just add a little bit more depth, especially with Trent Williams getting up in age. I think they add offensive lineman Jordan Morgan from Arizona. And with the final pick in the first round of the 2024 NFL Draft at 32, I think the Kansas City Chiefs select linebacker Chop Robinson from Penn State. Like I said, their team is solid, even though they desperately need wide receiver help. But necessarily, they can't give up a lot of draft capital to go up and get one of those new guys, one of those top studs in the league in the draft this year. So I think at this point, they go with the best available option. And linebacker play was somewhat shaky last year for them, so at times it got shaky. So I think they go with the best available linebacker right now in the draft at this point, which would be Chop Robinson from Penn State. And that is my entire mock draft for the entire first round of this year's 2024 NFL Draft. So let's transition to something else. I'll go over it next week and see how well I did. I have a little bit of a different episode planned for next week, so we'll see how that goes. But we're gonna see how many of these projections I get right. So something new I wanted to try out real quick. So I saw a hypothetical matchup for college football. College football is so much better than the NFL, in my opinion. I love it way more, but I wanted to go over 5 dream matchups that I think I would like to see, and I think a lot of people would like to see as well. Dream matchups from teams of the past going against each other. And I'm going to start it off with the 2018 Clemson Tigers against the 2022 Georgia Bulldogs. Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne against Stetson Bennett and George Pickens and that Georgia defense. I don't know necessarily who I would take in this because I think they're both evenly matched. That Georgia defense was something else back in 2022, but that Clemson offense with Trevor Lawrence in 2018, when everybody thought Alabama was going to kick their ass with Tua and Bama thought they were going to kick Clemson's ass that year. And Clemson came out and smacked them around the football field for 3.5 hours. I have witnessed very few times in my life a Nick Saban team get boat raced, and that's exactly what Clemson did to them that year. They boat raced them. And personally, I would take the 2018 Clemson Tigers. I would specifically over the quarterbacks. You have Stetson Bennett, who I don't think is necessarily a bad quarterback, but at college Trevor Lawrence, that's just another worldly talent. We all knew he was going to be a first-round pick the second he started a game for the Clemson Tigers. So I think the 2018 Clemson Tigers would take down the 2022 Georgia Bulldogs. All right, another one that I thought of recently. The 2005 Texas Longhorns, led by Vince Young and they also had Jamal Charles as a freshman, versus the 2014 Buckeyes with Cardell Jones, Ezekiel Elliott, and Michael Thomas. So here's the thing. When I talk about the 2014 Buckeyes, the way to their national championship was very different from a lot of other teams that have won it in the past. Braxton Miller was their starting quarterback at the beginning of the year, but he got injured before the season even started. So we didn't know how Ohio State was going to be. Then in comes JT Barrett, and he looks like a Heisman winner. JT Barrett was a great, great quarterback for the Buckeyes. and then he gets hurt before the conference championship game. So in comes third string Cardell Jones. Well, him and Ezekiel Elliott put the Buckeyes on their back and boat raced Wisconsin, boat raced Alabama, and then boat raced Oregon in the Natty. Personally, I don't think the 05 Longhorns, this is a hot take because 05 Texas is widely considered one of the top 3 best college football teams of all time. And I can agree with that statement partially, but when in a one-on-one matchup between teams, I can definitely see this 2014 Buckeyes team take down the 05 Texas Longhorns. I'm not really worried about the quarterbacks in this case because Texas struggled in that national championship game against USC. They struggled against Reggie Bush and Lendale White. And I think Reggie Bush is the best college football running back ever. But Ezekiel Elliott in that tear that year for the Buckeyes was on a tear. That man against Reggie Bush, when it comes to stats, like I said, I think Reggie Bush is the best college running back of all time, but I definitely think the 14 Buckeyes beat the 05 Texas Longhorns. 2019 LSU versus 2020 Alabama. Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Thaddeus Moss versus Mac Jones, John Mechie. Mac Jones, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, Najee Harris. This is a real close matchup, but I would lean with the 2019 LSU Tigers because I think they're the second best team in college football history. Both teams, both 2020 Bama and 2019 LSU, they both dominated people left and right. They left zero, room for doubt when it came to the national championship games, especially. LSU in 2019 absolutely humiliated Trevor Lawrence and the Clemson Tigers. And in 2020, Alabama beat the brakes off of a Ohio State team who was limping into that game. So, personally, I think the LSU Tigers would take this just because, especially because of the quarterbacks, you have Joe Burrow and then you have Mac Jones. I think it's such a very evenly matched team. I think they're very evenly matched, but I would give the edge to LSU because their defense was otherworldly stacked that year too. So second to last hypothetical matchup. Imagine the 2010 Auburn Tigers led by Cam Newton against the 2008 Florida Gators led by Tim Tebow. See, that's something I would have always loved to see. I think we got that maybe once in NFL. I don't remember that far back when it comes to the NFL that year. I know they were both rookies, I think, in the same year, but personally, this is a tough way. I can go either way. These are two of the 4 greatest SEC quarterbacks of all time. Cam Newton in 2010 was basically Super Cam before Super Cam became the term, and Tim Tebow was basically automatic on the goal line and truly unstoppable. Both Heisman Trophy winners, but I would lean with the 2008 Gators just because they had more offensive firepower, especially with guys like Percy Harvin. As much as I love Cam Newton and as much as I thought that Auburn team was great, even they do have Michael Dyer at running back, but I would take the 08 Gators over the 2010 Auburn Tigers because Auburn had some scares, especially against Alabama, but the 08 Gators stomped everybody. And then the final one we're going to talk about, this is probably a dream matchup. Arguably the greatest college football team in history, the 2001 Miami Hurricanes versus the 2005 USC Trojans. So you got the Miami Hurricanes in 01, led by Ken Dorsey at quarterback, and just a plethora of talent. And then you got USC, led by Matt Leinart at quarterback, and a plethora of talent. So here's the thing. I think Miami of 2001 goes toe-to-toe against every team in the history of college football, and I think they beat them. Not convincingly. Not every one of them would be convincing, but I definitely think the 01 Miami Hurricanes team would take down 05 USC. And a lot of people said who would have won 01 Miami or 19 LSU. I think 01 Miami still would have, but LSU would have gave them a run for their money. But it's no contest that the 2001 Miami Hurricanes is the greatest college football team ever assembled. You got to think about it. You had Ken Dorsey at quarterback, who only lost 2 games in his entire college career. Realistically, should have lost none. You have a 3-headed monster at running back, Clinton Portis, Willis McGahee, and Frank Gore. You had Najee Davenport at fullback. Then you had Andre Johnson and Darryl Jones at wide receiver. You had Jeremy Shockey and Kellen Winslow as the tight ends, Kellen Winslow Jr. A stout, probably the best offensive line in all of college football that year. You had Vince Wilfork on the defensive front seven. You had DJ Williams and Jonathan Vilma at running back, Philip Buchanan and Mike Rumpf at cornerback, and Antrell Roll. And you also had probably the best safety of all time and someone who would have been the best safety of all time in Ed Reed and Sean Taylor. I'm sorry, I don't think USC with Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, and Lendale White could go toe-to-toe with the 01 Hurricanes. I think the 01 Hurricanes are the greatest team of all time, and I think the 01 Hurricanes, maybe not convincingly, but I believe that the 01 Hurricanes would beat USC convincingly. Maybe not an entire blowout, maybe not like a 40-point game, but I think the 01 Hurricanes would beat 05 USC probably by at least 2 touchdowns. And that's going to wrap it up this week on The Lake Show, everyone. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. We're doing very well, guys, growing the channel, and I really appreciate all of your support that you guys been giving over the past year and a half, and even more recently. I love doing this for you guys, and I really hope you enjoy this episode, and stay tuned for next week's episode. It's going to be a good one. And I'm your host, Dominic Lako. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up, so